You hear two musicians from the same group talking about an awards ceremony.
You know, when we heard we'd been nominated for an award and we knew who the other nominees were, well, just for a brief moment, I guess we got a kick out of it. I mean, the other bands are guys we really respect, but we've always used our music to attack capitalism. It would be incredibly hypocritical to go to a ceremony sponsored by the corporate world.
Yeah, and we knew who had voted for us. We've been together for 4 years, and the people who liked our music from the start, the ones who've been coming to the gigs, they know what our principles are, and they wouldn't go in for that kind of thing. But, you know, you get your first #1 single, and the mainstream music listeners think you're a new band and they go out and vote for you. For a moment in time, your song's getting the biggest number of hits, and then the public move on.
You hear part of a radio discussion in which two people are talking about sport.
Well, obviously I was gutted that the home team didn't come out on top, but it wasn't altogether a surprise. 3 of the players were making their debut, and you can tell they were a bit overawed by the occasion, and it impacted on the overall team performance. You can't put the blame on the coach. Giving the novices a chance was a management decision, and it backfired. That's all I've got to say on that game, but I have to say that I do have a problem with the way that a couple of the players only seem interested in offering their skills to the highest bidder. They've got no regard for the fans, apparently.
That's what it looks like, certainly on the outside. It's a shame because those guys have inspired a generation. You have to wonder whether the newspapers are doing what they usually do and stirring up a bit of controversy. But if it's true the players are quitting and going overseas just for the big dollars, that's very disappointing.
You hear two university students talking about a fundraising event called 40-Hour Famine.
40-Hour Famine is about students not eating food for 40 hours. The idea is to promote a bit more awareness of what it's like for people who are starving through no fault of their own, say through crop failure or drought. Many students are too young to volunteer to go overseas and help out directly, and they haven't got the cash to make monthly donations. But taking part in this is something they can do. And of course, the sponsorship they get goes to excellent charities. This is my first year, but it's Tom's second, isn't it, Tom?
Yeah.
How did you do last year?
I only made it to 35, actually. I felt really dizzy and had to give up. But no one made me feel like I'd let them down. They were just concerned. I thought, oh well, I'll make sure I manage it next time. And look, in another 4 hours, I will have reached that goal.
Hi, I'm Simon, and last week I got to spend a whole day at the National Museum, where I was shown around by one of the curators. I'd only been there as a visitor before, so it was interesting to find out what goes on behind the scenes. The collections at the museum are quite diverse. There's a whole floor devoted to the natural environment, for example, and of course a large section for Pacific cultures. Melanie, the curator, told me she'd done a degree in anthropology, but when she applied to the museum she decided to focus on social history, and she's been working in that area ever since. I thought it would be worth asking what sort of educational background most of the other curators had, and what sort of work experience you needed if you wanted a position there. But apparently it's your communication skills that really count. They're essential for all museum staff. Then I asked Melanie to explain what kind of things she's personally responsible for. She said that whenever the museum acquired a new object, the first stage of the process was identification. That might involve, for example, finding out where and when something was made, that sort of thing. She would do that by herself, but she'd work with other specialists if the object was in any way damaged and needed restoration of some kind. Then we went on to talk about one aspect of being a curator that I know I'd be hopeless at if I had to do it, and that's when they have to write and maintain records. You obviously have to be meticulous about detail. Melanie also spends some of her time preparing for conferences and liaising with other curators or researchers working in the same field. She also has to reply to the correspondence and inquiries she gets from the public, and this can take up quite a bit of time. I was also curious to know what Melanie liked most in the collection, and she said it was a series of letters sent by a soldier to his wife back home. I had a look, and they were certainly very moving. What really caught my eye, though, and you can see them all along the walls, were a lot of advertisements from the 20th century. They really give you an insight into people's lifestyle at the time, well worth a look if you go to the museum. Melanie told me that many exhibits have been gifted. So, for example, most of the paintings have been donated, not bought. Apparently, it's not just wealthy benefactors, but ordinary people who want to offer a family heirloom, say. So, recently, for instance, a woman brought in an antique clock in perfect working order. Melanie has to say no to photo albums, however, because it's so hard to preserve them. I'm going to finish by mentioning the biggest problem the museum has, and it's not something you'd automatically think of. When it comes to preserving the physical exhibits, the curators are confident that they've got that under control, but they're not so good at preserving digital data, and they're investigating new storage formats to ensure it's preserved for posterity. Well, I hope I've given you a better idea of what it's like to work at the museum.
Speaker 1.
I'd given up just about everything, the job, the house, the car, and gone to Spain to be with my husband. Then 6 months later, it was all over. Both of us believe we'd rushed into marriage too soon, and there was little that made us compatible as spouses. At the same time, we felt the friendship that had drawn us together in the first place was just too valuable to throw away, and the only way to save it was by splitting up. The thing is, I remember hugging Alfonso at the airport, boarding the flight to Manchester and waiting to feel some kind of relief. It didn't come. By the time we landed, I had this awful sense that we'd rushed just as fast into a divorce. A year has passed, and I still can't help wishing we'd put a bit more effort into staying together.
I was a no-hoper at school, see? No one had heard of dyslexia in those days, so my teachers just classed me as an idiot. I might have behaved myself later if I'd been given a bit more attention then, but I was told time and time again that I was going to be a failure. It surprised no one, including myself, that I ended up in prison. But all that time on my hands gave me the chance to think. I realised I'd turned out just how they said, and I wanted to prove it could be different. I did a law degree while I was inside, and it was tough, I tell you. But since I got out, I've never looked back. I'm about to become a partner in a law firm, and that's an achievement that gives me immense satisfaction.
Speaker 3.
I'd always wanted to do voluntary work ever since I qualified as a nurse. Marriage and children always got in the way of my plans, though, but now that the kids were older, there didn't seem any reason to put it off, even though I was coming up to my 50th birthday. And once I'd got their backing, there was no stopping me, really. Of course, I missed them all when I was there, but I just threw myself into my work. I had to, really. It was a very isolated rural area. There was no running water, no medicines, and so much poverty. But I can't tell you how much I appreciate the fact that I was given the chance to go. It was a real eye-opener, and I learnt so much about their culture and about myself. For that, I'll always be thankful.
Speaker 4. I'd worked my way up to supervisor and got just about as far as I could go in the company. It was a responsible position and gave us a certain amount of security, and I suppose that's why I stuck it for so long. Inevitably, though, it got to the point where the routine just got too much. I wasn't developing professionally, and nothing about the job pushed me to better myself. So when Sue suggested taking over a cafe franchise, I jumped at the chance. Neither of us had a background in catering, but we refused to be daunted. We had to learn all aspects of the business in a very short time, but I found it all very thrilling and still do. Even now I wake up every day really looking forward to going into work, being in a new environment and dealing with the fast pace. Speaker 5.
I'd been biting my nails since I was a 3-year-old, apparently. It had never really bothered me before, despite my parents' constant moaning. They made me put this liquid on them called No Bite. Tasted horrible, it did. Until I got used to it, that was. When I started work, though, I began noticing the looks of mild horror on the customers' faces. Every time I was wrapping up a present or was just resting my hands on the counter, I could sense them staring, and it made me incredibly self-conscious. So I had these plastic tips put on, and that gave my nails the chance to grow. No one notices them anymore, so the problem is essentially solved. But it has nothing to do with my willpower. It's actually humiliating for a 23-year-old to be wearing plastic tips. It's a secret I would hate my boyfriend to find out.
You hear part of a radio discussion in which two writers are talking about their books. The last book I wrote was something my publisher asked me to write, about the River Thames and its history, and it wasn't a passion of mine, that sort of thing. And to this day I'm not entirely sure why the publisher approached me, but I could imagine how other people might be interested, so I signed up. And once I got into it, I found the whole thing quite intriguing. I'd rather not have had to limit our investigation just to the inner city, but there's only so much you can pack into 400 pages. Now it's finished, I have to say I rather miss working on it. Do you enjoy the research side of things?
Not so much, but now we have the internet, of course.
Indeed, but can you trust what you read?
The way I see it, the internet's given us access to limitless knowledge. If only we'd had it when I was first starting out, it would have saved me countless trips to the library and a lot of time and effort. Sure, you have to check and cross-reference things, but I can live with that.
I don't know if you've heard, but I'm off to Greece once the term finishes. I'm joining up with this team of archaeologists. They need people to do the physical stuff, the digging, I mean. It won't be paid, but it'll give me some real experience in the field, even if it's not strictly relevant to the courses I'm taking next year. And it'll make a change from the tedious kind of jobs I normally end up doing during the holidays.
Well, I imagine you'll really get a lot out of it. After I finished my first degree, and we're talking at least 10 years ago now, I got offered a position with a really prestigious firm of architects, and I felt I couldn't say no, especially because we were all still waiting for the exam results to come out. And it was good there, but I still wish I'd given myself the chance to consider something else. Well, that's why I've come back to university, I suppose.
If you only hang out with other game designers, if gaming is your entire world, that's actually going to work against your development. The people on top in this profession are the ones with, I'd call it, an insatiable curiosity for, say, history, science, music, that kind of thing. Anyway, when I'm starting out on a new game, I'll work out what the goal is. That's my priority. So, for example, for my last game, it was the idea that man is a part of nature, not separate, and I'll go from there. The people and the overall image come later down the line.
I probably have a similar approach, and I agree that whatever you're designing, be it a first-person shooter, action-adventure, role-playing, whatever, if you want to become one of the great game designers, you need a great deal of general knowledge and an inquiring mind. A good grasp of behavioral psychology is also essential. Without this, you won't convince anyone, and playing a game without conviction is rather pointless.
Speaker 1.
I was told the best way to prepare for an interview is by going to the company's website and finding out everything you can about them. The idea, of course, is that it creates a good impression and proves that you are keen on working for them because they can see you've done your homework. The trouble was that they hadn't done theirs. The web page hadn't been updated for over a year, so I asked all these questions about products they didn't produce and subsidiaries that no longer existed. They must have thought I wasn't very well prepared. It wasn't my fault, though, and I kind of lost enthusiasm for the job once I found out what had happened. I mean, it's a bit slack, isn't it?
Speaker 2.
So there I was the night before, in the living room, talking to the dog. A bit strange, you might think, and you'd probably be right. But I was getting ready for the next day, you see. The dog was the interviewer, and I was trying out all my questions and answers on him. I'm not sure that's what the writer of the article had in mind when she said, rehearse the situation with a friend, but it seemed like a good idea to me. Anyway, it was all a bit of a waste of time, really. I overslept the next morning, and by the time I got there, they'd already taken somebody on.
Speaker 3.
Now, you're not to get all uptight and on edge like you normally do, was what my mum said. And that's more or less what the careers teacher told us at school. Projecting self-confidence at an interview is vital for success. Those were his exact words. So, I put on my best suit to give me that confidence, cleaned my shoes, and off I went. Well, my hands were shaking so much you wouldn't believe it. I nearly spilt my coffee down my trousers. I think I managed to hide it, though. Of course, what I couldn't hide was the fact that I'd failed my maths GCSE. They wouldn't take me on without it. Shame, really. The money wasn't too bad.
Speaker 4.
Don't lean back in your chair, he says. If you do that, it might look as though you're trying just a bit too hard to cover up your nerves. Either that or you're not interested in the job. So, according to this Dr. Benson, it's advisable to lean forward, keep your legs uncrossed, and smile confidently. Well, I did all that. In fact, I smiled so much my face began to ache. But they somehow seem to realise that I don't normally walk around with a permanent grin from ear to ear. They said they were looking for lively, bubbly people for their sales team, and they weren't convinced that I fitted the bill.
Speaker 5.
I saw this video in the university careers office where they recommended imagining the interviewer in the bath, playing with a plastic duck of all things. The idea is that they're only humans, so there's nothing to be frightened of. So anyway, I thought about the type of questions they might ask me, and I got to the interview about half an hour early so I could go over the answers I was going to give. But, bath or no bath, the interviewer turned out to be not so human after all. It was like an interrogation, and the things he asked were really tricky. Nothing like what I'd prepared for. I just didn't know what to say. I felt pretty sick about the whole thing afterwards, I can tell you.
Time, ladies and gentlemen, is one of our greatest assets, and in this fast-moving competitive world, poor management of our time is a major cause of stress, both in the workplace and at home. The first and most essential element of effective time management is forward planning. If you start the morning by mapping out what you hope to achieve during the day, you can go a long way to avoiding unnecessary frustration and wasted effort. Be realistic, though, in terms of what you hope to accomplish in the time available, and think through carefully how and when you will accomplish it. Unmet expectations will only serve to put you under more pressure, to create more stress, and you'll only have yourself to blame if that happens. Of course, tiredness, rather than any lack of ability, can often present a major obstacle to our obtaining the goals we've set ourselves, or indeed to meeting the deadlines that others have set for us. If that's the case, stop, turn your computer off, take a break. If you feel you can't go on, or you're just too snowed under, don't make yourself ill. Work should always take second place to your health. It can be counterproductive to carry on regardless, particularly if the next day you have to phone in sick and take time off work. And also, if time is against you, if you're pressed for time, be prepared to adapt to the circumstances. Don't worry if what you produce is less than wonderful. We should not always strive for perfection. It slows us down, it reduces productivity and means we have no time for other tasks. Good enough is still good, and in all probability no one will notice the difference. And this applies to the home as well as the workplace. A similar dose of self-discipline is needed when we take on the household chores. Limit the amount of housework you try to do in a day. Lower your expectations and relax if the shirts you've just ironed still have creases. It doesn't matter. Because ultimately, let's face it, what we all work for is to make time for ourselves, to free up time for the things we really want to do outside of work. It's essential to set aside enough time to pursue your interests, to do the things which are most fulfilling for you in life. Many people fail to achieve the right balance between work and relaxation, and once again, stress is the outcome. And just a word of warning here, if by relaxation you understand slumping on the sofa in front of the television, think again. It is a poor use of time, and it usually ends up making you feel more tired and time-pressured than before. Now, technology has done a great deal to both